Finally time. With Toby announcing Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 only having testing left, it's time for me to attempt to predict all of Deltarune Chapter 3. And just to be clear, I'm not stopping at 3, I'm gonna give my predictions for the entirety of Deltarune, but not all in one video, because I will be hell to make. Now this is nothing original, plenty of others have made videos trying to predict all of Deltarune, so you may be wondering, what makes mine worth your time over others? I have the advantage of being wrapped in a conspiracy involving prophetic dreams and Deltarune, and one of those dreams happens to be the ending of Deltarune Chapter 3. So, if you put on your tinfoil hat for a moment, it's possible that Toby has chosen me as the great Deltarune prophet. This means my predictions have more weight than your average Joe Schmo YouTuber. For this reason, I've avoided changing many of my predictions too much, even if I think something sounds better and more likely. I've also avoided watching anyone else's predictions so I won't be influenced. I'm shooting for the stars on this, and if I miss miserably, I will gladly don that clown wig. Here we go. There's an unused laugh for the title screen with the file names Deltarune Chapter 2 Queen Laugh title gone. But unless this is for that old, more evil version of Queen, I highly doubt this was actually for Queen and this was just a placeholder name. I think this will be the laugh that plays when you select Chapter 3, belonging to the antagonist, of course. It sounds pretty similar to the Eyes jump scare in the Spamton ARG. Obviously, we start where we left off, in the dark world that Chris made in Toriel's house. It's pretty much beyond confirmed. There's a small part of me that still says it could be in Asgore's house as he has a TV, but it's pretty obvious at this point. You know that weird scrapped cutscene that was supposed to be a part of Chapter 1's intro? Well, I think, since it's Susie's voice, this is actually gonna be the intro for Chapter 3. So it's obvious this dark world will embody the main room of the house, since that's where it was created, but I think it will reflect the Dreamer house as a whole, with other aspects of the family as well. Since Chris and Susie fell asleep on opposite sides of the couch, I imagine we will wake up completely separated from Susie, and yes, I know this image exists, but I'll get back to it later. Soft but mostly vacant area, perhaps the inhabitants reflect some slothful state. And as for what they are, they could be anything really. People lose the most random things ever in the couch cushions. Go check yours right now and I bet you'll find something you didn't even know you had. After some wandering, eventually Chris will encounter the main antagonist of Chapter 3 for the first time. And if you've seen my other videos, you already know, I still think it's Mike. However, it's not just Mike. It's Mike and Tenna. They are one and the same, but Mike is the main body, while Tenna is the literal antenna, acting as a separate consciousness within Mike, paralleling Chris's relationship with the soul. At least we know Tenna is a character for a fact, thanks to Toby's new tweet, and we'll get back to that later as well. I've talked about this in more detail, but I'm still wholly confident that Chapter 3 isn't just a TV-themed world, but the main antagonist is in fact a TV personified. Spamton refers to the guy who screwed him over as the TV multiple times. And while I'm sure the official design of Mike will be much more detailed and unique than any of the fan designs, but the teasers do sure look like his head will be mostly teeth and eyes. The basic design from Mr. Luigi is what appeared in my dream, so it's the correct design as far as the prophecy aspect is concerned. So Mike's personality is probably what you expect, sleazy celebrity game show host, and for simplicity's sake, that's the design I'm using for the video. Though there is one particularly compelling alternate choice other than a TV host, what embodies the idea of a TV? A corporate overlord cartoon mascot. Mike, Michael, and Mickey are all the same name, and Mickey Mouse becoming public domain is something that's been long anticipated, so Toby could have known in advance that Deltarune Chapter 3 would take so long to release, and Mickey would be in public domain before it came out. Now it's about time to talk about chess theory. Simplified, it's the idea that all the chapter bosses are the chess pieces in order from greatest to lowest value. And next up is the Rook, which has something to do with puppets, I don't quite remember the details, but it doesn't quite have a connection to everything we know. But when you throw Mickey theory into the mix, what does the Rook appear to be? A castle-like stone tower. And what does Disney like to portray itself as? A giant castle kingdom. The iconic smile I think belongs to Mike, but the pink and yellow eyes belong to Tenna. While we've seen these eyes and mouth together, we've also seen them separate. Multicolored eyes already imply two different minds, but why these colors? The color yellow means a lot of different things in this series, but the color pink has only been used for one thing, which is the alternate name color for when enemies are sparable when you argue with the spare frogget. And of course, yellow is the normal spare color. Which is unusual because everything we've known about these characters seems sinister, and I doubt it's just supposed to be ironic. And if you listen closely to the jump scare sound effect, it sounds like a calm, deep adult man laughing, with a deranged creature screaming over it. I think the man's voice is Mike, and the weird voice is Tenna, with the sound being reflective of their personality differences. I also think they'll have similar mannerisms to Popple from Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga. I have absolutely no basis for this. Though it would be funny if all of this was wrong and Mike was actually the microwave, because he would ultimately still have the same boxy design. What would be even funnier is if the smile was actually Sans's and the only reason it's on the TV is because he has a commercial for his store. And throughout this video, when I talk about Mike, I'm referring to both Mike and Tenna at the same time, unless specified otherwise. Okay, enough dumb Mike discourse. Chris will end up in an unusual location resembling a fancy cabin, and this will be our first encounter with Mike. So Mike being Chris's TV, he will unquestionably have a much more direct relationship with Chris, and probably recall memories together. But since the TV was unplugged up until the beginning of Chapter 2, Mike might feel betrayed or abandoned by Chris the same way King felt to the school Lightners. Additionally, in order to make my Mike-Tenna prediction make sense with Spamton's ramblings, Tenna must behave like a leech, and by the time of the betrayal towards Spamton, Tenna had probably completely taken over. Chris showing up may be the thing that reawakens Mike. Now, I know a big problem you'll see here is everything feels a little too similar to Chapter 2, and that's just kind of inevitable. We had a machine as the main antagonist last chapter, and all signs point to the same this time. And from everything we know, he exhibits a lot of traits of Mettaton, and Queen also had a lot of traits of Mettaton, and not to mention Spamton. It might feel redundant to have a signature villain chair since Chapter 2 also had one, but Chariel is right there. What's weird is back in Undertale, Chariel was this normal chair in Toriel's room, not the iconic living room chair, which was a wonder why that even used to be the case. But in Deltarune, Chariel is the main living room chair. So what kind of alternate universe changing BS is going on here? And why was this detail even included in Deltarune? That, or Toby just overwrote this detail because it makes more sense that way anyway. I think Chariel will be a recurring set piece rather than a specific chair for Mike. Either way, Mike Tenna shouldn't have a flying chair, but a cool idea I came up with is something kinda like Dedede's chair in Kirby Right Back Atcha, and the first boss against Mike taking place after Mike asks Chris to take a seat, and both of their chairs start spiraling upwards on a big track. After defeating Mike, the chairs will break through the ceiling, launching them both in the air. Mike will disappear, and now Chris will be reunited with Susie, and Rouse will just show up out of nowhere as usual. Going back to chess theory, another big detail is how the bosses move. The king piece only comes into play at the end, and the queen piece moves absolutely everywhere. Both very true in Deltarune. Rooks are very in and out obstacles. They can spring into action as soon as the first pawn is out of the way, and being a fortress embodies a brick wall, so I think Mike will become a giant hindrance in sudden, unexpected moments, with a signature sneak attack just like the rook where he just slides across the ground, and generally just slide all over the place, like Lancer on steroids. Now, it would be much more likely that Chris and Susie don't get separated thanks to this image that was in the newsletter, which has the file name intro, but I can still make this work. And just keep in mind, Susie had the remote before falling asleep. I think the main gimmick of Chapter 3 will be hopping between different shows through screen portals. It's a big claim, but Toby has already confirmed it will have very unusual gameplay elements. It will also be the first taste of a bigger overarching plot point, that being subspaces within Dark Worlds. So, we can still call this entire segment before the screen jumping the intro. Thus, Chris and Susie can still reunite before it's over. Not sure what the things in this image actually are, though. This kind of structure would make more sense for an open-ended game, being able to choose what area to do first, but there's one problem. Toriel is here, and Undyne might be later. So there has to be an order of events. So either you can choose between a couple, then get to a singular point, then branch back out potentially, or it's just completely linear. Other gameplay gimmick will be minecart rides with swapping tracks, and if you've been on my channel in the past, you may already know why, but we'll get back to that. We have some teased dialogue about an enemy called Gingerguard. Now, it doesn't say what chapter this dialogue is from, and it's highly likely that Noel's house will be a future Dark World, and anything Christmas-themed will be there. But these gingerbreads were specifically mentioned on Toriel's stove, so this proves that it won't be a purely TV-themed world, but embody the Dreamer household as a whole. Perhaps these elements will still get transformed back into TV shows, like a cooking show, but then again, we already had that in Undertale, and that's just treading a bit too much of the same ground. Looking back, this dialogue is definitely not about an enemy, and it's an item, but the point still stands. Also, the pie just has to play a role here. I mean, in both the creepy end scenes, Chris goes to steal the pie, so it has to be important. Somewhere in the mid-game, there will be this big video game-themed arcade world, because we've gotten more talk about video games with Chris's family than cable TV, and there's no way we aren't getting Birdly action in the gamer zone. Since between the neutral ending and the weird route, Birdly will be anywhere from injured to dead, Birdly is unlikely to be involved in any major plots, but little side stuff is still a possibility. We know he at least has a funny scene at the festival. But why exactly would Birdly be here? I don't know, the same thought process as Susie perhaps. Birdly knew deep down it wasn't a dream and wanted to have an epic gamer quest. That, or his crush on Susie remains, and he stalked her to Chris's house. Almost every interaction with Chris and Birdly, Chris has been separate from the rest of the crew, so I imagine the same here. Now, I don't actually expect this to be in the game, I just think it would be a cool idea. But regardless, this video game world will have another mic encounter, a very specific minigame against Chris, and this minigame will be the demo version of the final boss's gimmick, just like Punch-Out was in Chapter 2. But I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet. The boss of this world will be 3 different bootleg versions of Super Smash Bros. Characters. A Sonic spoof, since Toby seems to be on good terms with Sega. An armless Kirby, because Toby has mentioned Kirby more and more in every newsletter lately, and even follows Kumazaki on Blue Sky. And, I don't know, Cloud or something. Sonic is the only important one here, because I think he is the culprit of who stole the Shadow Mantle that Sham said we'd need for the secret boss in Chapter 3. Or at least, he's the guy that ended up with it, because there's a high possibility King had it. But we'll resume that conversation when we get to the secret boss. Moving on from the gamer world, one of the more suggestive things that will manifest is the How to Draw Dragons book. It's already been heavily implied that Azrael has a big thing for lizard women, and this will probably provide some more Azrael characterization. It will also probably fuse with the purple Godzilla we saw on the TV, because I highly doubt Susie is actually going to turn into Susie-Zilla for the final boss like a lot of people have suggested, since we already had a battle of giant final bosses in Chapter 2, so I highly doubt we're doing the same thing again. I think it would be really funny is if this fight was one you couldn't spare, because Susie gets absolutely furious at its existence and attacks it no matter what you say. That, or Susie will pretend to help it, and then drop it into the abyss, making it also a manifestation of Yoshi, which has also been brought up multiple times. Also, it would be a cool callback if this enemy was just called No, like the sus enemies in the Earthbound Halloween hack. Let's just pray Toby doesn't go too crazy with the character's design. From this point on, there isn't much to go off of that isn't either major or endgame. One thing I really hope to see is a train chase, and a character on said train who mimics Mr. Macbeth from Henry Stickmin. Since it paid a homage to Undertale, it would be really cool if Toby looped it back around. And while anyone could be this character, I think it would be perfectly fitting if it was the Rules card boss for the chapter, because he loves to just pop up anywhere and serve whoever the strongest villain is, and pick up random villain roles, like the pirate. Only, I think it should be on top of the train instead of in the train, because that's just cooler. Only problem is we've seen some teased dialogue, and it's specifically from Rules saying he's not here to fight. But things can always change later down the line, and I'm sure he'll have a boss every chapter. What I wonder is why on earth is Rules going into different Dark Worlds even though he isn't compatible? Maybe he'll come up with some dumb explanation for why he actually is, ultimately for him to still be wrong. Lancer is also here, which makes sense since he's always in your inventory. Maybe he just won't exit this time. As for the other characters who end up in the Dark World, Toriel can't not be in this chapter since she was literally in the room when the fountain opened. She called the police, so at least one other character will be showing up. and the only two cops we know are Undyne and Napstablook, with Asgore as an ex-cop. And while Asgore showing up has incredible potential, I specifically don't think it will happen because of this image, which is labeled Chapter 4. If Asgore was in Chapter 3, Susie would probably be reminiscing on how weird Chris's family is in Chapter 3, so Asgore probably won't be here. I never thought Napstablook would be in this chapter. That was until this Blue Sky post from Toby, which has a remix of spoof tunes, and none of Toby's other Blue Sky joke posts use Deltarune or Undertale leitmotifs. It also sounds like it could be a smaller part to a bigger song, and it sounds to have started in the middle and stopped midway through. However, I still just can't see it. Napstablook has absolutely no interest in their job, only doing the bare minimum when they absolutely have to. The only connection I can make is all the Metaton paralleling stuff could have some payoff with Blukey's inclusion. And overall, they just aren't a major enough character for me to expect getting a spotlight in Deltarune. If they do though, I hope the Dark World design is something similar to the galactic palette seen in the garbage scene from Undertale, or the way they look in the Fangamer merch, being a complete polar opposite to their blank design. Undyne is the most obvious choice. She's desperate for some action in hometown, has continuously denied Chris's warnings of the Dark World, and the only reason Undyne wouldn't be there is if she was preoccupied with the Wet-Nosed Bandits. But that's only a factor if you interact with Undyne, and something potentially missable can't be a factor in the main plot. I expect Toriel will show up first, since she's a no-brainer, but Undyne will probably appear later, since she's still technically a surprise. I have a big suspicion their Dark World designs will be similar to their Undertale designs, so if that is the case, that will have huge ramifications on Undertale's lore, but since we don't actually know that, we can't say anything regarding it. I honestly don't know how Toriel and Ralsei will react to each other, and honestly, I wouldn't be that surprised if Ralsei is absent for the entirety that she's with us, just so they don't have one. But if they do meet, will Toriel mistake him for Azrael? I would hope not. Toriel should be able to tell them apart, and I imagine Azrael's taller. And both the Dreamer's horns in Deltarune are still white, so there will be no reason that Azrael's wouldn't be white as well. And unless there's something secret about the Dreamer family we just don't know, there should be no reason there can't just be other goat people, so Toriel shouldn't immediately assume it's someone she knows. Though, Toriel will still uncertainly have some reminiscing about Azrael triggered by Ralsei at least, and though I don't think Asgore will be in this chapter, I do hope Toriel's character development will include her hate for Asgore dying down, and reflecting on the family as a whole, perhaps the result of seeing Mike and how him being shunned has ruined him. And since the TV isn't just Chris's, whatever Mike holds to Chris he probably also holds to Toriel. Now we have Undyne. There's two big ways Undyne may behave. Either she'll keep a level-headed attitude and, if you told her about it, will realize that Chris was telling the truth about the Dark World, or the more likely option. Undyne will immediately assimilate into the world and a role as a superhero like she always wanted to, and probably beat up Mike's goons since they're comically criminal. Eventually, Chris and Toriel will find Undyne, and she will probably be too lost in the sauce and cause a fight. This will be where a cool callback will take place. Toby scrapped the original Undyne theme because it didn't sound like being heroically punched in the face enough. Unless Undyne correctly suspects Chris created the Dark Fountain and sees them as a villain in this case, any scenario where we fight Undyne, she isn't really the hero. So a theme more in line with the original would be warranted here. Since in Undertale the only way to defeat Undyne as a pacifist was for her to overheat, I think it would be neat if Toriel could aim her fireballs at objects around Undyne, catching more things on fire and eventually exhausting her. I don't think Toby wants Deltarune to be too focused on the Undertale cast too much, so I don't think Undyne will have the same length of development and screen time as Birdly did. Moving on to the precursor to the endgame, Toriel, still being unfamiliar, easily falls into one of Mike's traps, which ends up being a game show, of course. Chris will be placed in the spotlight, but not as a contestant. Mike will reveal the one and only contestant with the sacred words, "Your mom." Just like my dream. I think this will be the first time Susie meets face to face with Mike, and remember, she has the remote. So Susie tries using it on Mike, the game show doesn't actually go through, everything falls apart, then our crew ends up getting captured again, because this is also definitely going to happen every chapter. The final world takes place in a giant rook-shaped TV tower, which is where most of the stuff we've been teased is. Around the bottom of the tower we'll have an anxious minimum wage restaurant worker similar to Burger Pants. Behind the shop they guard a door leading to the secret boss. The song that plays will start off sounding like Hip Shop, but as they crack under pressure it will turn into a more distorted, anxiety-ified version. At first I thought you should see an ad of the boss's cancelled show to get the tip, but it would be way funnier if the shopkeep was so nervous they just blurt out the truth under no pressure at all, just from being talked to. And now you can ask about it, and they will immediately give up and move the entire restaurant higher up in the tower, because we still need an endgame shop. But of course, just going to the boss isn't enough. Sham said we'd need the Shadow Mantle to beat them. So now is the point where you need to backtrack, to the Sonic bootleg. I imagine some obnoxious minigame where you have to chase him across some pillars, and probably corner him. I imagine it'll be similar to the Rosa chase from Amori. Now everyone thinks the Shadow Mantle will be a shield, but I think it will allow you to teleport. That way we can have some kind of barrier in the lead up to the boss instead of Toby being forced to make some kind of bad ending for the boss. Or at least, so I can order this script correctly. The soul gimmick for this chapter is almost certainly the purple soul. And the fandom agreed with this for a while, but recently people shifted towards thinking it would be the green soul, probably because the Sky Mantle in the files says it shields attacks, so people thought the Shadow Mantle would be the same. But this makes no sense. That would mean both Chapter 3 and 4 use the green soul for the secret boss. Finally, to the boss itself. There's been many theories. Toriel's flower trash can theory, Muffet and Mew Mew theory, Twilight Zone theory, and of course, the Woody theory. And I think that it's all of them at the same time. Woody is the main component. If you haven't heard Woody theory before, just watch a different video on it, because there's way too much evidence to bring up in this already absurdly long video. But I will add one line of dialogue that we know for sure is about Chapter 3's secret boss from the Spamton Value Network.
Who will be the secret boss of Adventure No 3? Me don't knows, and me don't cares. Me only cares about Spamton. The rest can go up in the airs.
Up into the airs, huh? Two of Woody's iconic catchphrases are reach for the sky and ride like the wind. And who could forget the iconic Toy Story sky background? Also, the cowboy-themed Undertale Yellow released right around the same time Toby said that Chapter 3 was complete, and it has his approval, which seems to be just too coincidental. And fun fact, in the original prototype for Toy Story, Woody was the antagonist. Flower theory fits nice and simple. Woody, trees, plants, flowers. Easy. Muffet theory can blend somewhat, with silk web strings becoming a lasso, or vines, or both. And can we just mention the Just Shapes and Beats collab that Toby has never acknowledged? This is a tangent, but I don't know how music copyright law works, and so maybe for some reason using the remix, you don't need permission from the original creator. But Just Shapes and Beats just casually has Muffet's spider dance in a DLC, and there's been no acknowledgement of that from Toby, and also Gaster's in it technically. So I hope that since this will be probably our last opportunity for some big Muffet adjacent action, that somehow that gets reflected like the Macbeth. In Twilight Zone theory, Chapter 3's secret boss is a ballerina doll. Woody is a doll, while not a literal ballerina. A TV show actor who jumps around with choreography could be seen in a similar light. There's one small problem with the Woody theory people seem to be overlooking. Woody is a copyrighted character. Toy Story is Pixar's cash cow they will never stop milking. And looking at how Disney and Pixar have acted towards people using their stuff, Toby would be walking on eggshells, basing a character around their #1 mascot. Toby has been making more and more collabs as time goes on, even with big names like Cartoon Network and Nintendo, so there is the smallest possibility Pixar will collab with Toby for this. It would probably be better for their image than pumping out soulless sequels, but we all know that's not going to happen. They always play it safe. Another possibility is, yet again, Mickey theory. Mickey is public domain, so there's no issue there. It acts as a double-edged sword of freedom. They're free from the shackles of the original owners, but now bent to the will of the masses, which more than often creates forgettable garbage. But going back to Woody theory, where this all started, is the phrase, "friend inside me." Who is this friend? The voice box, or the mic, if you will. Something I'm sure Toby knew before he started foreshadowing all this stuff is that there would be a million different interpretations of Mike, from designs to what role he fills, so I wouldn't be surprised if the secret boss also inhabits some characteristics of Mike and Tenna. Since I already theorized they have a two minds, one body thing going on. The music leading up to this boss would obviously be that ominous jingle from Friend Inside Me. Okay, it's time for the design of this thing. Long before Spamton Sweepstakes, when there was a hive mind agreement that the Chapter 3 secret boss will be a purplish colored female, I made this design. The idea, with her being locked away in a tiny room all her life, lied to that this room was the entire world, and she was convinced that she was the angel. But this was back when I thought the green strings that control Spamton were from Mike, which isn't the case. But some aspects from this idea are still good. So far, all the secret bosses have been male, and even though Woody is male, for some reason I still confidently believe this one will be female. I don't know, maybe she's trans or something. I imagine she will almost be like a final evolution of Muffet Mad Mew Mew, so that checks out. Since we're making a female character, I took some aspects from Jessie from Toy Story as well. Since Asgore also gives flowers to Alphys, we can see the color scheme of the flowers that Toriel keeps throwing away based on this. And I put one where the badge would be, kind of similar to some performer outfits. I put two speakers where the buttons would be to put emphasis on the voice box. I was gonna make the thorns orange like Omega Flowey, but I realized I didn't put near enough purple on this design. I don't know why I gave her this diamond knife. It's just something that's been in my head for a while, and the secret bosses always have attacks involving diamonds, so I guess that works. Oh yeah, through this whole thing I forgot about the memory head theory, which is that all of the faces on memory head are the secret bosses. So the funny thing is I actually had a triangle nose for this character before I changed it because I thought it looked ugly, so it could be the face in the middle, but I think more than likely it'll either be the face on the top, because it looks kind of like Muffet, or that people are wrong that this face on the side is one of the ones we already know, and that this face is actually the third boss, and the one in the middle is actually Jevil. And I honestly don't have a good name for this. The best I could come up with was Barbed Rover, a combination of synonyms for the words thorn and cowboy. She attacks on sight, binding your soul to one string. This is where the Shadow Mantle is needed, allowing you to warp from one string to the next. This is how the Purple Soul will differ from how it worked in Undertale. Maybe there will even be more than 3 strings, where you can hold down the warp button to move down more than once at a time. This also parallels how in Woody's Roundup everything's propped up by posts and strings. When Woody jumps, it's more like moving up and down held on a specific plane than moving through the air. The boss theme will be the final evolution of Ghost Muffet Mew Mew theme that keeps getting reused, and of course have the freedom motif. So the friend inside her is the voice box, whispering evil ideas to her. This is why she fights you. It's lying, telling her that defeating you will give her a new chance for her show to be greenlit. And to defeat this boss as a pacifist, you'll need to get a hold of the pull string and slowly rip it out. Fighting her will eventually slash her open, and her fate to be separated from the voice box is the same. Taking 2 of the most atrocious plot points from Toy Story 4 and turning them into something actually interesting. Now, it may be odd to have such similar premises for both the main boss and secret boss, but Spamton and Queen both had a gimmick of unplugging wires, just different methods and aspects. And like how the other bosses had a carnival attraction for the setting, Jevil having a carousel and Spamton having a roller coaster, this one would be one of those cardboard quick-draw light shooter games. The way the targets move in these games is also similar to Purple Soul attacks. In Twilight Zone, the ballerina yearns to be loved, and that makes sense considering this is the main character from a cancelled TV show. And the first Friend and Me goof Toby posted contained the words,
"Some other folks might be a little bit smarter than you, big and stronger too, but none of them
could be the mic talking to the body, or Barb projecting onto you. Another phrase later down the line is,
As the years go by, I will never die.
a potential phrase of denial uttered by the mic. Final attack will have a cinematic moment where Barb in the fun game will ascend to the sky with a brief taste of heaven. This will be the exact moment the Shadow Mantle is transformed into the Sky Mantle. Now, after the voice box is ripped out, the fight will end, and Barb will have the realization that while she's been freed from the control of the inner voice, she's still under the control of fate. And the reason that this is where the Sky Mantle needs to be formed, because it would be a huge plot hole if Chris just casually had this super powerful item that could teleport you throughout the entire franchise, versus having a shield that only works against specific attacks, which may only be present in the exact moments that they're needed. So far, we got a Susie and a Rouse weapon, so this one's fight ending will probably give a weapon to Chris, maybe a vine cutter. Armor piece will definitely be the hat. I don't think Chris will have a panic like in Chapter 2, because this whole chapter kind of embodies them, and maybe, though it's somewhat stressful to see, seeing it so commonly in this chapter might help them come to terms with it better. Okay, so the backstory. Spamton had a rich narrative, but Jevald was just kind of randomly selected by Gaster to learn the truth, so we don't really know what his endgame is with the secret bosses. The show getting cancelled could be a strategic move on Mike to hide the truth, when he noticed she wasn't taking it well. Speaking of, it's obvious that Tenna is linked to some big-time crime. But I also think he has a big-time link to Gaster. I should have put this at the beginning, but I fear some people will immediately have rolled their eyes if I connected him to Gaster in the first 5 minutes of the video. But it's kinda undeniable. The eyes appear behind the mysterious chair that says, "What if it could get darker than dark?" The most likely suspect for the Valentine's letter other than Gaster himself is him. In an early version of the Birdley fight, there was going to be a panel with his face on it, and this has nothing to do with Spamton, it's even before the area he resides in, so the only reason for this to exist is if this character was more significant than an element of Spamton's stories in a Chapter 3 character. He's on the same level of cryptid as Everyman or Icy. So, in the beginning, there was only Mike. Being a TV personified, he had antenna that would allow him to tune into different networks and frequencies. Like how Spamton was able to reach out into the light world with his emails, Mike could have potentially reached Gaster with his antenna accidentally. We don't know what Gaster's endgame is. It's possible Gaster is the reason he became a crime boss in the first place. The yellow eye is a staple of characters related to Gaster, so that checks out. And going back to these colors being the colors of mercy, perhaps in whatever plan Gaster is trying to enact, what he's doing to these characters he sees as mercy. That, or Gaster has influenced Mike into thinking what he's doing is merciful. And so the split personality leech Tenna was born. Okay, I'm sure you're wondering how Spamton ties into this. It's time to explain how the Dark Worlds work, as a whole. So far, the connections between Dark Worlds made sense. The first two are directly connected rooms, and it's easily possible the library computer was in the school at one point. But how do you explain some printed off spam emails either in Noel's house or at the computer library having a connection with Chris's TV? I guess theoretically the TV might have been gotten from one of the two, but Spamton himself gives us the answer. Responding to the theory that Noel created Spamton, he says that she was merely the first to respond to his emails, the world's first charity, as he puts it. The Dark World and its inhabitants aren't created when the fountain opens. They all already exist. The fountain is just a gateway between the two worlds, and by some specific means they can reach out to the light world. So, why do only specific rooms with themes become dark worlds, and not just the entire world having a dark version? To explain this, I'm gonna give huge spoilers to Stranger Things Season 4, so skip to this timestamp to avoid. Through Stranger Things, it's believed that the Upside Down is an alternate dark version of the world that's existed since the dawn of time. But in Season 4, we learn that isn't quite the case. The universe itself has always existed, but it was a formless darkness until the main antagonist was cast into the world, and he shaped it to reflect parts of the Earth that he had an emotional connection to. Only the town from the show actually has an upside-down counterpart. So whoever created the Dark World has some emotional connection to these places, or at least they've been observing them, shaping worlds out of what they found interesting. And there's proof of how they're connected. In the green room, we can see tiny mouse identical to the ones in Chapter 2, showing either entities can move between these worlds, or objects here are manifested the same regardless of where they are. Still an implied connection. With this in mind, it's possible the friend face in Queen's basement could be Tenna physically present, or because there was a broken TV in the basement, it manifested as the same entity. Though this face appears to be disembodied since it's layered on top of the teacup ride if you trigger both at the same time. Another idea I've had for a while is that Mike is more of an essence of the TV, with the machine body being more of a vessel. At very least, Tenna, as discussed earlier, is potentially a completely separate entity manifested by Gaster, so that's another possibility. Now, the grand finale. This is where that dream comes into play. The most interesting thing about this dream is that your party consisted of Chris, Toriel, and Noelle, with Susie and Ralsei being nowhere in sight. Also, Toriel's design was one of those fan-made red ones, but I honestly forgot which one. I don't know why I wouldn't have committed that to memory. I could somewhat see Ralsei being swapped for Toriel, but Noelle? Theoretically, Noelle could just be following the adventurous spirit, and Noelle's house is right next to Chris's, so when Chris opened the door, the dark smoke leaking out, and Noelle would have been the first one to see it. So it's not hard to imagine that Noelle would jump in, but what's even more confusing is Susie's absence. The only thing I could come up with is a plan that the Fun Gang made to distract Mike while Susie goes to sneak the remote up to him, since there's no way he would allow that openly. Though, if they got put in jail earlier, it would make no sense that Susie would still have it. I mean, maybe she got it back, or it ran out of batteries, and that's why she's been absent to go get those things. Regardless, though the idea is that this dream is a prophecy, I highly doubt there will be a different party for this fight. There was a scrapped idea where Birdley would join the fight against Queen after being freed, but that's a little different, because he was directly involved in that scenario. And it's showing 4 characters at the same time instead of them having to be swapped out for each other. Anyway, it starts with our party riding squiggly minecart tracks up to the final building. Those evil cords from Spamton's basement try to attack you along the way, and you could make the cart avoid them, probably by switching tracks, though some reason the cords have completely different sprites with no face resemblance anymore. Thinking about it now, they looked identical to the cord from the Halberd Core fight Kirby Superstar. You fight Mike on a big blue tower. I don't remember the shade of blue. And for some reason, all I can remember was him talking and not actually using attacks. I believe the music in the dream was the fan-made song Laugh Track, or something similar. At least it had that same Spamton melody bit from Laugh Track. This isn't in the dream, but perhaps the TV remote will be used in this fight. The power button being sabotaged, Susie will be forced to flip between channels, each one giving a different attack. This is also where that "your mom" joke comes in, but from what I remember, it was a flashback and not a part of the fight itself. And there was a second phase where he casually became huge and teleported you to Spamton Neo's boss arena, where he chased you from behind to the right as you ride away. But I don't think Toby would make such a direct callback like this. I could at least imagine somewhere in Mike's tower a TV that plays a Spamton control with "Hey Every" looping, and Mike reminiscing, but nothing like this. We have to remember in playtesting, no one even liked Spamton, so I doubt Toby would have designed Chapter 3 around callbacks and such to a character that he wasn't sure people would even like. Anyway, this is where the dream ends. After defeating normal Mike, he will use one of those TV portals we were using earlier to suck Chris into another subspace. And here's where that special fight gimmick I mentioned earlier would be. And it should come as no surprise to anyone that it's gonna be Super Smashing Fighters. It's been referenced 3 times across both chapters, and I already had an entire boss based around it. And again, Toby said this would be a very gameplay gimmicky chapter. So unlike Chapter 2, which incorporated some of the turn-based battle elements into the Punch-Out fight, I have a feeling this will be a full-on fighting game type fight in this game about fighting. Who would have thought? Now after this phase, it's time for one of those big revelations. Remember how I said we would return to that post about Tenna Toby made? Well, Toby accidentally dropped a huge spoiler. One of his friends said, "I miss Tenna," but that seems strange. Why would Tenna be gone? King and Queen, even after the chapters they were in, still have little interactions in the castle town. They don't leave, so the only explanation other than Tenna being a minor character, which simply I don't think can be the case, is something bad is going to happen to Tenna. With my theory, it's possible Mike could get cured of Tenna, but I don't think such a simple happy ending like this is going to happen. For a while now I've had the answer. The Hand of the Night enters the arena. The way Spamton reacts to talking about the Knight seems it is also involved and likely at the top of this deeper crime. The Knight is cold and immediately disposes of Mike by strangling him to death and throwing him off the building. This will be our intense moment where Gallery plays for this chapter. Now hold up, I hear you saying, isn't it way too early for a Knight fight? Well, Toby originally said he was going to have chapters 3, 4, and 5 in one package. Seems a little specific, right? Well, going back to chess theory, in the order of the value by the knight piece, we know that it would be the boss of chapter 5. Now, the value for the bishop and knight are actually the same, but the knight is still always depicted as lower than the bishop, and chapter 4 is obviously too early for the knight. So I think this trilogy of chapters is the trilogy of the knight. Having the knight only show its presence at the very last moment of chapter 3 as the beginning of the trilogy. The knight will have no dialogue, and there will be no way to spare it. The first attack will be the same plain spike box attack that King had, showing their connection to the king, but not giving anything away about the identity of the knight, slamming its fist into the ground to shake it up. But of course, it will have to pull out its signature knife. And I even think it will have one final attack where it attempts to make a dark fountain, and the only way to stop it is to attack with all your might. And if you don't, it'll just immediately go to a failed game over screen. You will have to weaken it, and it'll be forced to fall back. After sealing the fountain and returning to the light world, Toriel may or may not know what just happened, but one thing's for sure, she's not going to want anything to do with that TV after that, making it easy for you to bring it to the closet of the dark world. This can also be applied to the other items. It's hard to say if this experience will make Toriel realize Chris can stand up for themselves, or strengthen her overprotectiveness after seeing what actual dangers lurk in the world. I just hope in future chapters Toriel will at least be aware of what's going on, not necessarily being a part of it. Parents actually knowing about the supernatural adventures their kids get into is underused. And the mother in Mother 2, Earthbound, is super chill about Ness going on a quest to save the world, and Toby would never miss an opportunity to be inspired by Earthbound. I have a feeling Undyne's reaction to waking up will be cut short, as a different cop shows up and assumes Undyne was slacking. But since the only other cop we know is Napstablook, they probably won't be very assertive of it. If Noelle wasn't actually involved in the Dark World, she at least would be the first person to go see Chris after it's over, since, like I said, she's right next to it. Undyne returns to the station, and if you previously mentioned the Dark Worlds to Undyne, she'll apologize for not believing you and possibly be on lookout for them in the future, but I doubt she'll ever actually find them until maybe endgame chapters. Somewhere in the Dark World, we'll find an item to give to Metaton without the meta or the ton. It could easily be anything in the wide world of TV, and it would be really funny if it was the egg, which I forgot to mention, but it's not like there's anything that we can go off for its placement, and it'll probably have another vaguely gastro-adjacent dialogue. I think there'll be no Onion Son interaction this chapter, faking you out that something bad happened to them after investigating the Song for the Sea. Bringing everything to the Dark World, Mike isn't 100% dead, but highly busted. He will probably be placed around King's jail cell, or in it. We at least know he isn't going to be reactivated until chapter 5. But we're not done with this story just yet. We of course have the Weird Route. Now the name itself is important. It's not called the Genocide Route or the Snowgrave Route, just the Weird Route. It doesn't inherently mean you have to kill things, but there is unfortunately one big piece of evidence that makes it hard for me to imagine it won't follow the same formula. So of course, Toriel will have a fire spell, and like in chapter 2, normal enemies aren't explicitly killed, just left in a burnt state. Toriel will probably be much more on board since her #1 priority would be protecting Chris, and she'd likely have more trust in Chris's judgment. And of course, we have the Undyne fight. This is another reason I didn't expect nonstop, because they make it very clear you can't kill ghosts. I'm not sure we'd need a special ring this time, because Undyne is already so weak to fire. But now that big piece of evidence. All the way back in Chapter 1, there has inexplicably been an animation for enemies dying and disintegrating into red dust. Since even Snowgrave is dubious if it actually killed Birdly, there's no way this isn't for some crazy death. And you can trigger this animation in-game if you trick the game and use Snowgrave on a normal enemy. So it clearly is some kind of equivalent. The rest writes itself. While Toriel wouldn't be feeling nearly as bad as Noelle did, killing who appeared to be the hometown officer would probably still take a toll on her. Not sure if she'd leave, though. At some point, a theme just called G will play, slowly building an all-too-familiar word with the other chapters. And since we get locked out of the egg in Chapter 2 on the Snowgrave, I'm not sure we'll be able to get it here either. I'm also not sure if the final boss will be too much different, because the circumstances don't change near as much in this one. Mike still needs to get busted, though. If any alternate boss, I actually think it might be Noelle herself. At the end of Chapter 2, Noelle talked as if she'll be investigating Chris's strange behavior. In this route, she'll definitely enter the Dark World, and possibly catch wind that they've done the same thing to Toriel. Chris will resist our control as much as possible to avoid battling her, and since we made Noelle stronger, she'll probably be too powerful to beat anyway. The soul will have to seal the fountain prematurely. Yeah, this seems way too early for a fight with Noelle, but I don't see this being very likely. What I absolutely do expect is in the weird route, seeing Noelle stalk us like Flowey did in Undertale. Also, and remember, this should be happening regardless if we continue the weird route or not. Just that we started it at all. But I don't think you'll be able to do Chapter 3's weird route if you haven't done Chapter 2's first. Either way, we wake up, with only a single frame of Noelle fleeing, and without a trace of Undyne, aside from maybe a pile of ash, Toriel will have absolutely no reason to believe what happened was any more than a dream, and she'll probably walk out of this having no trauma, aside from maybe the same animosity towards the TV, because we still need that. In Hometown, the police were already barely recognized because there's never crime thanks to the mayor somehow, so Undyne's disappearance will probably go unnoticed by most. But for nonstop, they always did the bare minimum and relied on Undyne, so I'm hoping in this route we see nonstop become stronger and stand up for themselves, kinda like Alphys in the aborted genocide route. It'll be interesting to see if Birdly's absence does anything as well. But all that being said, the ending. Unfortunately, I don't have much. I think this will be a perfect opportunity for us to see Toriel's room. Maybe Toriel will even force Chris to sleep there like overprotective moms tend to do. But what Chris actually does, pulling out the soul and all that, is almost impossible to predict. Maybe after reflecting on Mike and Tenna's relationship, Chris won't pull out the soul. And since Chapter 4 will be releasing alongside 3, there's no good reason to have a super confusing, cryptic cliffhanger ending. But I do think the rendition of Don't Forget that will be played will be even more distorted than it sounded in Chapter 2, probably with a staticky filter. And while that's a little anticlimactic, I mean, I've made such a large script here that I've exceeded the character limit twice on Keep Notes, so give me a break. This might be a bit rushed because, memes aside, Chapters 3 and 4 could be dropping any day. So if I procrastinate too long like I usually do, this will be all for nothing. And while I'd love to take a break while I do it before I do the Chapter 4 video, the looming time limit applies there too, so the grind never ends. Not really, of course. While I have the ideas for the other chapters, it'll be a while before I make those. Now don't forget to like and subscribe for more Hyperlink Blocked.